Good afternoon, and welcome to NeoCon's May Speaker Series, Designing in a Digital World. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Lindsay Martin, and I'm with the NeoCon team, and I'm going to go over a few housekeeping items first. Today's sessions qualify for accreditation, and certificates will be emailed within 3 business days to everyone who stays on for a full session. More details on accreditation can be found on the NeoCon website under Programming. Also, the final 15 minutes of this session will be questions and answers, so please feel free to submit any questions via the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen during the presentation. So now I'd like to provide some background on our speaker today. Today's presenter is Bonnie Reese. Bonnie is an experienced strategist and regional co-leader for consulting at Gensler. With her background in qualitative research, she is uniquely adept at translating human needs and behaviors into strategies for design. Her work includes everything from master planning for a medical campus and creating digital solutions for STEM learning to designing frameworks to map the future of the data economy. Bonnie has collaborated with clients across a variety of industries, including American Airlines, AT&T Discovery District, the City of Austin, the University of Texas Dell Medical School, and Vodafone. Most recently, she has focused on opportunities to transform the way we work and behaviors in the urban landscape in response to COVID. Prior to arriving at Gensler, Bonnie was a leader at Frog Design and also ran her own design consultancy firm for 3 years. In addition, she has taught design at the McCombs School of Business and the University of Texas at Austin and spoken at countless events such as DigiCity Connects and the Texas Tribune Festival. And now I'd like to hand it over to Bonnie Reese to discuss the Race to Drive experience for employees.
Hi, everyone. Great. Let me just get my presentation up. Super. It's so great to be here, and thanks for inviting me. I have a favor to ask everyone today. It is so hard to make a presentation to such a wonderful audience and not get to see your faces or hear your voices. So I am lucky to have my colleague Anuradha here today. And what I'd like to ask you to do is to engage in a bit of an experiment with us. And I confess I've done this experiment before and it's worked. So you're not going to be plunging into the unknown too much. But we'd really like to ask you to engage on chat throughout this presentation. Anuradha is going to ask you some questions as I move through, so that we're able to start to hear what you're thinking as I present. And we also want to get your voices in the mix. So I have given Anuradha full permission to jump in and share as she sort of collects and looks at those comments, to share some highlights or some themes that might be emerging from what you're saying. So in the chat, you can do that. And then in the Q&A section, there are 2 different sections in Zoom. Those will be the questions that I will answer at the end of the presentation. So again, I encourage you to connect and have an ongoing dialogue during this. I won't feel interrupted or like you're being rude. Super. So I'm thrilled here. You know, my background didn't start in workplace, but I found myself working in one of our European offices when the pandemic hit. And suddenly, with such disruption, and given my background in innovation, my phone started ringing from many of my Gensler colleagues to start to ask questions about how should we start to think about this disruptive moment, especially because of my background in digital design, and how do we start to think about the digital workplace. And so suddenly I started moving much more into thinking about workplace during this period. And it's been a really rich and interesting period of time. And I think it will continue to be as we move to our next phase, as we start to move into a new moment. And so I'm going to really reflect on that today, because we're on the cusp. So as we all know, work and place have been uncoupled after years of us thinking about workplace as one thing. And this means a lot of different things. But most importantly, we're at a moment where a lot of us are trying to decide, Are we going to want to work in the office, or are we going to work remotely or from home? And of course, businesses are also trying to debate, what does this mean for our spaces, for the experiences we create for our employees, how we operationalize that, how we manage it? And frankly, as much as everyone wants all the answers, our clients call all the time and say, what is everyone else doing? I'm like, no one, very few people have done much yet because we really haven't entered the full next phase. But we're getting ready to enter a period of experimentation and innovation. Employees have choice. They can decide, or at least they expect that they're going to have much more choice than they did before. So managing those expectations becomes quite important, and making sure you're responding to keep everyone connected and creating an equitable solution is going to be very important. I think what's interesting is that, if we were to look at the heroes of the pandemic, certainly our frontline workers, they really get the most praise. But technology has also really proved to be a huge hero because it's kept work humming as we've moved through this pandemic. And, you can even begin like doing searches and thinking about what the media is saying. We're overwhelmed and perhaps even a little bit weary of the discussion around it. But at the end of the day, tech has kind of won the pandemic in many ways. But the reality is, from all the research that we've done at Gensler, and we've done global research as well as more bespoke research for individual clients, there is no doubt that everyone are missing human contact, both personally, but especially at work. They're feeling like they want to go back so they can reconnect with individuals, and they struggle with collaboration at home. They're able to get their work done and collaborate through communication, but some of those richer whiteboard sessions are not giving them the fulfillment that they had being in the office. I listened to Priya Parker's South by Southwest closing keynote. She's someone who thinks a lot about how we gather as human beings. And one of the things that she said that stuck out to me is, Zoom is not a place. And I've raised this question with colleagues, and we've had some debate about it, because you can argue Zoom is a place, but really Zoom is a platform and a portal for another experience. And the problem right now is that people think, and when I say Zoom, I mean Teams and Blackboard, all the different platforms, it really isn't a place, it's a vehicle, but we've come to think of it as our destination. And I think we need to shift some of that thinking. I mean, we've learned so much about what's worked and what hasn't worked during this time. And it's important for us to pause and soak in those learnings and act on them as we move forward. First of all, commuting is a really probably top of the list for many people. While people love not having the commute, and of course it depends on your city, where you live in relationship to work, it's been wonderful for people to gain that time back. For a lot of people, that was me time. I found that many people have started to try to create thresholds that reconstruct that moment of entering or leaving work that existed when you had to go to the office. One of my colleagues actually takes a drive every morning to start his day as part of his process of going to work. I don't do that. I'm happy to just take a walk, but many do. So I think the other thing is caregiving. And it's interesting because many people, especially of the younger generation, are talking about caregiving in relationship to children. But I think caregiving in relationship to aging parents, or even just being present for your family, is something else where there's tension. In other words, it's really great to be able to have more fluidity there and be there to help with homework. Of course, everything is homework right now for many of our children, but people also need that time to get away. It can be hard and distracting. Collaboration. We've learned a lot about some great virtual platforms. For me, Miro is a tool set that, whether I'm in the office or out, that I know I will continue to use in my practice moving forward. But there's not that impromptu collaboration that occurs, or it doesn't happen quite as easily. And while there are certain technologies that support whiteboard collaboration, most of us don't have those in our home. And so the ability to get on a whiteboard together is a real loss. Also, health and wellness. Many people exercise or take a walk or engage in a hobby as an in-between activity, cook dinner ahead of the evening. But there were more opportunities when I know for me, when I was at work, I was moving more because I had to move from meetings to meetings. And while that's sort of a micro movement, that was something that gave us more movement in our days. In terms of control, many people say they can focus better at home, but frankly, a lot of people say they can focus better at work. And learning and growth, people have time to engage in many of the opportunities for learning online and have more time to do that, again, with getting rid of the commute or having more flexibility with their schedule. But mentoring and shadowing becomes more complicated. And finally, connections to colleagues. Many people said, I really have grown and had deeper connections with my immediate team, or I've built connections with people who aren't in the same office as me, where we share something else in common. But for others, they're feeling very detached from colleagues and missing a lot of those casual collisions. So it's a mixed bag. We've learned a lot. So how do we act on these things? I think the reality is that both the software world and the workplace are listening to what's happening and trying to evolve their offerings to drive a better experience. I don't think the workplace is going away, and certainly technology isn't going away, but they are going head to head to kind of see who can develop better experiences faster. But the reality is the winner that's going to emerge is going to be those that can really best connect and integrate across remote and on-site. We're going to have to meet in the middle to figure out how to address the myriad needs and decisions of both tenants and employees. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the workplace. And how is the workplace, if this is a race, how is the workplace going to be able to win it and stay in the game and remain not just relevant, but really an important force of gravity for workers? And there are 4 areas I'll talk about today. I'm going to focus on employee well-being, connecting to remote colleagues, leveraging data to fuel intelligence, and finally, the importance of shared amenities. So I'm sort of starting with the more employee-focused and moving more towards kind of operational and efficiency conversations for those who are building owners or developers. So let's talk about employee well-being. The reality is that employee well-being is not just about, hang on, I'm going to go to full view. I just realized I didn't do that. Okay. The reality is that we've seen so many apps roll out and so many we're allowing you to get ergonomically set up at home and meetings set up to support well-being. And we've got exercise classes you can do remotely. We saw those happening before the pandemic, and those are happening. Well-being is not something that just emerged during the pandemic. But the reality is a lot of the research and things that we're hearing back from employees is that people don't need something else. What is needed really is the ability to be able to create and integrate this into everything else. I mean, cognitive.
Bonnie?
Yes.
Sorry, the screen has gone black. Wondering if you can just kind of reshare.
Okay, let's see. Thank you. How's that?
And yep, we are back.
Okay. Great. Thank you for letting me know. I have once gone 35 slides without knowing that I wasn't sharing. So whoever gave us that clue, thanks so much. Okay, so again, cognitive function is better in a better space. Well-being is not just about rolling out additional benefits or giving you an app. That's not going to solve it. You have to think about it holistically. Sorry, now I'm having. Well-being must be something that's really built into the space and the culture. And I do really love this quote around kind of the rise of the wellness app, is that it really isn't just about an exercise class. It's about really thinking about how we can create wellness cultures. And I have a client I'm working with right now, and we were addressing the idea of not just individual well-being, but also team well-being, the idea of what does a healthy team look like? And one of the things that we is starting to put in place around well-being. And we talked about, is that something a team should do as a separate meeting, or is it something that the teams should build into existing meetings? And at the end of the day, we said it should be something they build into their existing meetings, because no one needs another meeting. That is not well-being. Maybe you have a different experience, but the importance of trying to think about how we can take what exists and improve it to support well-being. So, and the importance of thinking about, and this is kind of coming back to this, like really fitness and lifestyle, bringing that into the space, the importance to think about caregiving and supplying. We heard so much about the need for childcare and how important a benefit that can be. Also, tenant engagement. How do you think about enabling collaboration? And I guess one of the things I'd like to say about collaboration and being intentional about the words we use is people use collaboration to just mean talking. And I think that there are many different categories of collaboration. And it's important for us to think about how do we want to start to categorically think about collaboration? Because having a conversation, yes, that's collaboration, but it's very different than trying to co-create something together. And the spaces and softwares that support that should look different in order to support different categories of collaboration. So it's our hope at Gensler that we're going to start to see a rise in thinking about space archetypes differently as we talk about different categories and needs around collaboration. Health and wellness, the importance of having, not just those features for employees, but also having buildings that are actually circulating clean air and feeling full of light and well-being. Then I think that there's, Anurada's here.
Yeah, and I just to comment, just getting some comments in about, and things you're going to address, but the need for outdoor space, creating these spaces that maybe feel a little bit like home, have some residential features, just kind of different areas, softer seating. So I thought you may want to comment on that and how that supports, the overall employee experience.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we are learning what we like about home and what we might want to bring back into the office. So that is this idea of it feeling homey, of us having different kinds of chairs we might sit in, moving to different spaces and having that diversity rather than just being at one desk all day. I mean, even small things like, being able to provide that through the desk itself and the furniture you provide. But I also think that it's important when it comes to this to think about how, technology can support this. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Also, how are we going to think about, providing focus work? I think right now, and I don't know that this is actually true, but there's this idea that, focus work will occur at home and collaboration will occur at the office. I don't know about your days, but it's not quite that clean cut for me. I move back and forth between those throughout the day, and I do need different things to support those. I also know that as we think about the diversity of people's homes out there in the world, that some homes are better for focus than others, either because of the city they live in, the family, the pets, the space they have. And so as I moved from Europe in a smaller apartment to Texas in a larger house, like my ability to work at home changed pretty significantly. But I think all of those are important. And getting into that, connections to nature really, really help. And again, some people have that more easily at home than others, but most people are able to get into nature with a shorter step and no security line when they're at home than in the office. So how do we start to look at how we can bring nature and integrate that more in the office setting? Whether that's, the reality is that not everyone has that access to nature in a building, but we'll get to that in a minute. So let's look at, you're going to see as we go through just some kind of early thought starters we've had around what the offices might look like that I'm going to share with you today. So here you can see an office that's really showcasing that ability to kind of blur the boundaries between indoors and outdoors. You see a sort of garage door that opens, and you see these spaces outside that are actually technology enabled. So outside doesn't just mean that you're sitting outside without technology, but it integrates technology in order to enable that collaboration, get that fresh air air, work outside, and have protected and safe space to do that. So we think that's wonderful. But the reality is, right, not every office space has that outdoor space. We think it's smart as much as you can add that into if there's an opportunity to add balconies or think about a different way of creating spaces to have more outdoor spaces. But let's just be real, in a tall high rise, that might be limited. But there are other ways to bring the outdoors in. In addition to biophilia, which I think everyone's familiar with, we found that like actually being able to use large scale immersive digital screens to start to bring nature in can also be calming and bring some kind of beauty into the space. I know that in our office, in our Austin office, unfortunately, we haven't been in too much this year, but we have this huge screen that shows some of our favorite spots in Austin in a kind of video format. So a very slow moving, peaceful, and it really expands the space and gives that connection not only to nature, but also to the city we live in. And it makes me happy every time I see that pool in there when I walk in. So, and there's another way that I think is I'm really curious to see how this plays out. I know that there's some offices that allow dogs. I worked in one for many years that allowed dogs and really loved that experience. But I'm sort of curious to see if there's more pressure, especially given how many people have adopted new pets and have enjoyed having them with them. I'm really curious to see if we're going to see a rise in dogs in the offices and a sort of embracing of that. I'd like to think I have cats and I'd love to bring my cats to work, but I just don't know that cats are going to work at work. But I'm curious with this audience, and I think Anuradha is probably seeding this question. I'm really curious to hear from you all if you think that that's something that you'll see change or that you're open to, and what are the downsides of that? Are there things that might, depreciate value? I know like in residential, people don't want actually to have dogs as renters in some cases. So I'm wondering what it means if we were to see a rise in this in the office. And what would you do how would we start to design differently to incorporate animals into our spaces?
Yeah, so getting a lot of, different responses, a lot of positive ones that people would like, but then, concerns about allergies or if, that can raise some anxiety levels for, other coworkers. Just how would you sort of manage the protocols around having, these pets in the office?
So I do know that there are, behavioral guidelines for animals if you're planning to bring them to work. And so not every dog can come to the office. I think it has to be a dog that's friendly and used to people and that doesn't probably disrupt conference calls. I actually once was in a room with a dog that didn't bark, but breathed so heavily during conference calls that they had to be asked to leave the room. But I think if you can agree to that and also have dog zones and non-dog zones, so that if there are people who really don't want to be around dogs, they don't have to be. But a lot of the studies do show that it brings stress levels down dramatically to have, some well-behaved pets in the office, as well as in our lives. The office isn't the only place for animals, so.
Yeah. And then also, getting some, interesting feedback about then where do you start to draw that line, with like kids or, other kinds of, facets you want to bring into the office. Just let me scroll here because somebody had a really interesting comment, that sometimes, not all owners or even buildings will take responsibility. That's really on the folks that are bringing them in. Again, so how would you, so just kind of managing all of that or having the discussions to start to manage what those capabilities look like and protocols for the office.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a whole bunch of legal stuff, and that's not my area of expertise. And I don't think there's one size fits all answer. I think you have to look at your culture and what is important to the people that you want to employ, and also what industry you're in and what the different kind of competitive landscapes are there. But the reality is I think we are moving to a much more we're starting to see the different industries merge to have similar expectations. There was more of a division before with technology over here, then you had professional services over here potentially, and they had very different protocols. But as like technology's culture is infusing workplace more and more, I think we're starting to see that those expectations are starting to come together in order to draw the right employees. And I think it's interesting about children too. I don't know that it's about school. Younger ones may not be, but I think there are ways to start to integrate them more. And it's been one of the great things about the pandemic, really, is that we've gotten to see each other's children. And that's been normalized. We don't have to present the perfect front of the parent. We can be, I used to have calls with my London colleague, and he has 2 twins, and he was always wearing a lopsided tiara on all of his calls as he was between dress up games, as he moved through all of his conference calls. And I found it endearing and human, and a sense of vulnerability about having our families not necessarily visible, but not invisible either. So something to navigate and think about. Great. So point 2, the importance of connecting to remote colleagues. I think this is something that even the reality is I have worked with some clients who said, we're going to go back to the office, all of us. But even if you're asking all of your employees to go back to the office, I still think things are going to be different with the partners you work with, because you may choose that, but many people won't. So we have to be prepared for the fact, no matter even what we might decide as an employer, how can we think about building in these connections to people remotely? And the reality is that employees are expecting that they're going to have more flexibility to work from home. And we've also got a ton of employers who are thinking about the cost benefit analysis of reducing their real estate footprint if this is indeed what employees are seeking. So, software is rapidly evolving to think about all the different needs that we have. I know for most of us, it's either Teams or it's Zoom or it's Blackboard, or I'm sure I'm forgetting another important platform. But the reality is right now, there's a race to start to think about diversity of needs. How do you deliver a more fun experience that is more about team building and connecting and engagement that doesn't feel so staid as a series of squares on a thing? How do we also start to think about camera? We have a lot of lessons to learn from Hollywood, and this is important because as we think about our conference rooms and putting cameras up in our conference rooms, how do we think about different angles to eliminate the fatigue of our engagement with screens and be able to focus on the humans? So a lot of things rapidly evolving there. And the reality is, again, to kind of compete with those experiences getting better and to make the workplace really resonant and a place where you can equitably include those who work remotely, our spaces need to evolve as well. This is an image from the Google offices, but you can see it's not so much about one screen and one camera. I'm sure all of you have been on a call, and if you haven't yet, you will be in the coming months, where you are talking to a room full of people instead of having everyone be in their separate places talking to each other as individual talking heads. You can't see the facial expressions and get the richness and hear everything in most cases when everyone's in a room. So how do we need to evolve our meeting spaces in order to be more hybrid and engaging remote workers? So what might this look like? The kitchen is so important in an office. Whenever you do research, people describe it as like the heart of the office. And I would say that depending on how you classify work, it's probably not because it's the best place to focus. It's the place where you bump into people. It's the place where you nourish yourself. It's the place where you take a break and discover something unexpected by either overhearing it or having a conversation with someone new. So what does the next generation of our kitchens look like to start to include individuals? I mean, imagine you see this gentleman in the middle in the orange pants talking to someone on a screen. Imagine that when you walked into the kitchen, there was something there and you could from home say, hey, I've you know, I'm taking a break and have some time to chat. And you could walk up to that screen and see 4 people who weren't in the office that day who were available to touch base and say hello. And you could say, oh, I haven't talked, you know, to Juan in a while, and click there and have a quick conversation with Juan while you have a coffee. I think the importance of those interventions happening throughout the space is quite important as well. Here we start to see, you know, the importance of flexibility and how does virtual integration work across flexibility. You're going to see later, we're going to have to be able to reconfigure spaces based on who's in the office and who's not. Days really need everyone in the office, despite the fact that that's not a typical scenario for you. So how do you increase density? And it's because it's a celebration. It's a day about connection. How does the office switch modes? Maybe there are, you know, signals in the environment that tell you it's happy hour, time to go home. Music comes on. You get a different lighting. You actually have screens embedded through the office that are work screens during the day, something that you can collaborate on or connect with someone virtually. Oh, I have a quick question. Let's get them on the line to work through that. And you need those to be embedded. But those screens could also switch modes and become kind of environmental art that lends a sort of fun vibe during a happy hour when everyone's in the office. I also think it's going to be important to understand who's in the office and who's not. Offices, you know, this is a little subsection, but they're large and you may not know who's in today, who's not. So you can take advantage of connecting with someone or knowing that someone you need to connect with isn't in the office today. So being able to make sure both in mobile technology as well as potentially in the space itself, you're able to see quickly who's around, who's not, where they're sitting and how to get to them, as well as report that for yourself. So I think those are all going to be important changes that will drive value in the office. And then finally, the conference rooms. I'm actually getting ready to embark on a research project to kind of prototype and look at the future of the conference room. So the conference room is going to need to evolve, as I've said already, to figure out how it includes remote participants. You can see the green figures representing those remote participants in these sketches so that they're there able to work with you and come into the conference rooms. Conference rooms also might be more team neighborhoods on some days than, you know, boardroom. And also, you know, having a one-on-one conversation with someone in a big boardroom is not probably the right vibe for when you want to do a performance review or have a more intimate chat. So how can we start to create these spaces to have nooks and crannies and be reconfigurable to meet the needs? And of course, we're going to have meetings again all around a table together. And so you'll need to be able to do that as well. So, you know, at the end of the day, I think it's just so important to make sure that our offices are connecting to the people who aren't in the office. We found that connection and being able to enrich that remote connection in the coming years, those virtual connections, is really going to drive a lot of value for the many employers who are coming to embrace a hybrid workplace.
So Bonnie, one comment that's come in that's interesting is about how, you know, design has really evolved now to be able to just use flexible furniture and spaces that can be, you know, then adapted more so than, you know, technology and screens is sort of the hard wiring of the walls, ceilings, things of that nature. So do you want to talk a little bit more about, you know, really how, you know, furniture is playing that role in terms of creating these adaptable spaces?
Yeah, I mean, my question is, I think furniture and technology are going to start to merge much more so than they have been. I mean, not that they're the same, but you know, when you think about the conference room, do you want the screen on the wall? Or if you're trying to have a kind of hybrid dialogue, do you want a row of screens that sit at the center of the table so it's easier to talk and see people without turning away from the people at the table? But I do think there's so many furniture solutions emerging to enable like drop downs for privacy. I mean, there's some wild ideas and there's some more traditional reconfigurable pieces of furniture that exist. I mean, the Google campus has like the blow blow-up walls that sort of emerge to give you privacy. But, again, it could be as simple as being able to pull something over. We do know privacy is a huge issue. It's a topic. Our research has shown that privacy is top of mind for people as they move into the office, and especially because we've existed in a state of at least privacy from our colleagues, if not our families, and during this period of time. So yes, that need to reconfigure, but some of it is also just about having the toolkit of things you need in a space, whether they're digital tools or their furniture, so that you can shape it the way you want it to be or for the needs of that day. So, a big question we often get is, frankly, is like, what is the responsibility of my tenants and what is my responsibility? Our point of view is that it's very important to make sure that you have the infrastructure, the technology infrastructure in the space to be able to listen and learn from the occupants within it. This allows you to also get information operationally that can help you make better decisions. But it also gives your tenants what they need to plug into and connect to their systems, so that basically you're creating a building operating system. So you've got your tenant data coming in and what they're looking at and thinking about, but you also have building data and, frankly, data beyond the building. It could be weather, it could be city, it could be traffic, but that you have all of this working together to drive real intelligence, to be able to drive both employee experience, but also operational efficiencies. A good example, especially of this in the hybrid age, is because we might have different numbers of employees in the office on different days, is being able to think about that and introduce operational efficiencies to support that. So imagine that you have 3 buildings on a campus and it's a Friday and only really you have 2/3 of the employees that typically are on there. Well, what if you shut down that building and everyone went to the 2 buildings? You increase employee experience because you have that density and aliveness. No one wants to be, well, I won't say no one, but most people don't want to be sort of feeling alone in a deserted landscape. So you allow yourself to have that density, but you also have sustainability focus and being able to shut down the operations of that building, to reduce food service, all sorts of things to help reduce waste. So there are ways to start to look at both of these together that benefit both tenants and building operators. But I want to say, like, the intelligence is not, this is not like the operating system isn't just you flip a switch and suddenly, like, you know everything. It does require human touch. And people need to get that data and learn to how to look at it and make intelligent decisions that take the data, but also take your aspirations, your goals, what you know, your intuition, in order to help guide and make better decisions. And this may be about the entire building, or it might be about an individual conference room who gets priority for it based on what is needed. So I don't want to suggest that the employees disappear. I mean, that you suddenly are, humans aren't needed anymore in this. I just think they're doing something different and potentially providing more value to choreograph. Okay, Honorata, what are we hearing?
So we have a attendee here who is a facility manager. And so, really talking about how employee occupancy, density, just understanding where the empty workstations are critical, for that kind of planning. But from the tenant side, what this person is hearing is that, people really want their own workstations. Even if it's only coming in once a week, they just feel very strongly about that. So, what are sort of thoughts on how do you start to balance some of that as you're planning?
Oh, yes. I mean, everyone wants to have their cake and eat it too. I want to stay home on the days I want to stay home, and I want my own office. But I think there are ways to help brand and give people their own sense of space, and kind of give them some privacy if indeed you're embracing hybridity. So the answer is, transformation is going to have to happen. And that might mean that people have to kind of give and take around what it is they're looking for. But I think if you create spaces that allow them, like if we think about the kind of residential model of having different spaces you can move to do different things, if you deliver a great experience, people are willing to let go of their idea of I have to have my own desk when the experience is truly improved. What's hard for employees to imagine is I'm giving this up, but I can't see or imagine what I'm getting in return. So I think you have to really work through those. It's a change management exercise really with your employees, but you have to work through that to understand why is it that they don't want to give up that desk, and make sure you're able to provide them what they need to feel comfortable. I also think one of the reasons that people right now really want their own desks are twofold. This is my hypothesis, because we've seen this again in our research as well. People are saying that a lot of this research was done at the time of the pandemic, where people have a lot of anxiety about sharing touch surfaces and everything. And so we will see if that remains as powerful of a driver for individuals moving forward. But I think you have to be able to reconfigure the spaces, right? So what do people need? So this is sort of a pre-pandemic idea, right? With this idea where that kind of peach bubbles are all about concentration. But as we start to see remote working come into play more, and people are doing more of that kind of focus work at home, connection becomes more important. People are coming in to connect. So you need to design these spaces that are about bringing people together, and that you're using the office as a source of inspiration. And then also, as even more people are working remotely, what does that mean? So you need to be able to figure out how can you switch the mode of the office in order to support what the modes of the individuals working in the office might need. Honorata.
Yeah, and one more interesting comment in that, as employees have now shifted, to working from home, that they are also expecting employers to help support that setup at home. So, how do we envision companies balancing that cost for setting up the office, but then also providing that setup at home?
Oh yes, another I want to have my cake and eat it too situation. My point of view is that employers have to be very intentional about this. You can't just say like, okay, we're going to be more flexible. Employees need to understand very specifically what it is that you're saying. And frankly, I think that those decisions are hard because people don't know what is the right answer. We want to provide a good employee experience, but there might be business pressures to think about how we shrink our real estate footprints. So you have to look at your individual business and understand what are the key business drivers and experience drivers in order for every single employer to make those decisions. And then based on what those decisions are and those drivers and those behaviors, are you trying to get people into the office, or are you trying to incentivize people to work from home more? That's a really important question, because it's going to inform my answer to that question. If you are trying to encourage people to work from home, you need to invest in their home setups. You need to invest in software. You need to make sure they're set up to work comfortably from home as best you can. If you're really trying to drive people back to the office, then I think you're making the investment in this, and perhaps you're not supporting that remote work as much. If you're allowing freedom of choice, but you're supplying them a desk every day, again, I would argue it is not the responsibility of employers to necessarily provide two amazing desks for people. So I think you have to strategically decide what are the behaviors you're seeking from your employees, and then invest to drive experiences that make them want to embrace those behaviors. And I do want to say something which, is perhaps challenging, and I've kind of inferred it, which is the importance of thinking about an entire new definition of operations for offices. I think we're able to start thinking about what might traditionally have been administrative staff in an office, to be able to kind of level them up and help them think about kind of choreographing experience for the employees they know so well. The importance of being greeted when you walk in the door is still such a positive experience for people, again, in the research and conversations I've had. But it's also not that. It's also when you're like trying to find a conference room as we're dealing, or finding the right conference room that has the right kind of setup for for a remote engagement, or suddenly you thought it was going to be a face-to-face meeting and it's moving to a more hybrid meeting? How do you have someone help you navigate the technology and the right spaces and moving people around to get them into the seat that's going to best meet their needs? And I think that's going to require an operations team who's paying attention to both the people and the data. I think we're going to see a new category of worker emerge. Okay. So let's just be honest. For an employer, they're thinking about workplace, but for a property owner or developer, they have to think beyond a single workplace to create value for the property itself. That will benefit their tenants, but it will also kind of benefit them and the city they live in. And I think there's some really interesting answers to consider here. The first is, like, right now offices are kind of 9 to 5, maybe 7 to 7, depending on your industry. But, office buildings were designed to kind of go to sleep at night. I think as we start to move into this next era, there's a real importance of thinking about how you can create richer shared amenities that might live beyond the workday. How do you use that? I mean, so much happens ground floor spaces in some of our larger metropolitan areas. But there's also a really unique challenge, which is companies don't know how all of this is going to play out with, like, how many people are going to want to come in. Am I going to decide, like, oh, you know what? We said everyone could work from home, 3 days a week, and we want to lower that number and have them on site more. How much square footage should I be, investing in? And so we're seeing the need to have more shared spaces that can flex and, frankly, also be monetized to support the ebb and the flow and the different needs and amenities that employers might want to provide. So historically, a lot of these have been baked into whatever the monthly rental is. But in this case, there are other ways, as we're starting to see, that employers can just pick up, okay, we do need to take over that co-working space, and how might that co-working space, which could have a different flavor and vibe, let someone feel like they're getting out of the office to work remotely, even though they're adjacent. And that, as people walk through and technology, can just seamlessly know that someone from this company just walked through the door and sort of be able to charge that back to the company. So providing more flexibility for tenants. I also, this is an idea that I think is, I haven't heard anyone doing it yet, but I'm dying to see someone do it, which is, what if two companies shared an office? Now, you might say branding is so important, that we really make sure that that experience in the office feels like you're connecting to the company. But what if branding all happened digitally, so that you could really turn on and off two entirely different branding in an office, and you have one company that's there Monday through Wednesday and another company that's there Thursday and Friday, allowing all the employees to be on site together, reducing this kind of need for constant hybridity, allowing all the employees to be on site together, and then work from home 3 days a week. And the office would feel uniquely like their own. So I think this is an interesting idea to explore, and it could be the whole office, or it could be components of it. Experience centers are on the rise, and those are largely driven by digital. These kind of immersive digital experiences where you can take your customers. You don't necessarily use it. Well, some companies do, but not all companies are using it 5 days a week. So what if you had a space that could be a shared amenity, again, that is immersive and filled with rich screens and a rich hospitality experience as well, adjoining it, that you could have for the day and allow you to quickly, brand it for yourself, put your materials there so it feels like when you bring your customers in there, they're in this amazing experience, but they don't have to foot the whole cost of it because other people are able to rent and use that space. And frankly, the one thing we've seen is that developers are wanting these spaces more to showcase their properties. So it could be used and for whoever owns the building to showcase other properties on days that it's not being used by a tenant. I'm curious to hear what you all think of that idea, so I'll just throw that out there. So we're winding down now. So just to review, I think the importance of supporting well-being, connecting remote colleagues, in the space, leveraging data to drive intelligence and providing great amenities will help you in the hearts and minds of your tenants and their employees. Thank you so much.
Okay, so I think we're going to go ahead and shift to Q&A, but just to, finish up on Bonnie's last point, we're hearing kind of, yes, that there are some opportunities where shared offices had worked well, but then, maybe it's just more just shared amenities versus office space. So we're seeing kind of both, models there at work.
Yeah. And they're not mutually exclusive. So, but I think the demand around the pressures around how we think about our real estate square footage have, well, there's going to be a lot of evolution in the coming year. Okay, questions?
Great. Thank you so much, Bonnie. What an excellent presentation and a lot of great conversations and comments going on in the chat room during the presentation. So I'm gonna, we'll take a couple of questions, and then if we have a few minutes, perhaps we can look at some of the comments and discuss them as well. So one of the first questions, will future research and shadowing of clients to understand design needs now include observing a workplace's remote world? Example, seeing their interaction on Zoom activity and on Slack.
Yes, I love this question. I have a background in research, so it's especially interesting to me. I will say that one of the things that we've been doing during the pandemic is leveraging video diaries in order to understand people's home office setups and how they're working remotely from a sort of narrative, as well as we've had some of them go into the office when they're alone during the pandemic to kind of give us tours of the office and understand. So it's less shadowing and it's more actively allowing employees to tell their stories, which I think is really important. It's not the what, it's the why that really infuses and inspires design. So I'm a big believer in that. But yes, technology is also capturing so much data. There's so much. I mean, in fact, I'm working with a client right now who thinks about their corporate events. And as their corporate events have moved virtual, they're able to capture so much more data about them because well, data is more naturally in this current moment in time captured by technology than it is by our spaces, although I think that's going to change quickly. So I do think that there's an opportunity to start to look at, and we've done studies where we're looking at movement data in a space and mapping that, along with qualitative research, people talking to us about the space, as well as even looking at things like email traffic to understand where the opportunities are to shift collaboration points, to support focus work, and to understand how we can start to look at those data together to make better decisions about how people work and how we shape their work experiences.
That's great. Another question, do you think there will be a lot of vacant spaces in buildings as companies shrink their footprint, or do you think it will be developed into other building amenities? So I know you touched on the white labeling of office, which I think is incredibly interesting and really a great use of technology, but do you think maybe they'll move from office to different amenities that maybe we didn't need before and now do?
So, I mean, I think it's a complicated question. There are a lot of different angles at which to answer, because I think there's also a question of, and where are we going to start to see vacancies? Like, are offices going to move towards the centers? Or are we going to see more distributed sort of hubs of offices across the city to shorten commutes, but still give that connection to work? But I guess I would say we're seeing a number of different things. One of the things that I'm loving seeing is that we're seeing clients talk about giving space back to the community. How can I create spaces for the community in which we reside to be engaged? Offer a space for school children, or to offer a sort of experience center or a community space that allows them to kind of engage with our brand or just provide a service there. So that's, I think, an exciting opportunity as you think about the reallocation of space. But I also think that for some, I mean, again, it sort of depends on how this is all going to play out. And I don't think workplaces will go away. I do think we'll see square footage shrink, and it's going to be up to companies whether they feel like that investment back in their employees or their community or their brand is the right investment for them when it comes to real estate. So we'll see.
Yeah, I have a question. How quickly do you think all of these innovations and technologies will be available, and how quickly do you think employees will adopt them into their design plans and offices?
So, I mean, at the end of the day, I don't think it's up to the employees. I mean, I think it's up to an
Or
organization.
employer, I apologize.
Employers. Okay, great.
Employers, yes.
Well, but it is also a question of how quickly employees will adopt them. And I think it's up to the employer to drive adoption. Different employers are making different decisions. I mean, they're all talking about it. And the technologies are there. They are rapidly evolving, and there's always a question around point of entry. Do I want to be an early adopter and kind of be able to be an early adopter and be ahead of the game, but also maybe perhaps suffer a bit as they work out the kinks?
Yeah.
But being an early adopter also gets your employees engaged in using these technologies. So I think, and the technologies are vast and huge. Gensler has a great connected experience offering that really looks across all of these. And the truth is like, you have to prioritize what are the technologies that are going to be best for our organization to drive the behaviors that we want. So I think that the technologies exist, they're mature. And depending on which one you're talking about, I'd say now is the time, or now is the time to start piloting and experimenting. Yeah. But I mean, I'm just going to say, like, this year is a year of experimentation. Yeah. Like, anyone who comes to me and says, what's the answer? Let's implement it. I'm like, let's experiment. Like, we really don't know. And I know everyone wants certainty, but we just don't have it.
That's right. So another question, how much home-like amenities in the workspace are too much? When is the model trying too hard to force people to stay in the office longer rather than encourage work-life balance?
I don't think people stay in the office longer because you have a comfy couch. So I don't know that actually the design of the office really keeps people there that much longer. I think there is a question of like, if people want a home environment, are they going to go to the office, or are they just going to work at home? So I don't believe that the office needs to mimic residential. I think you can take some inspiration from home and looking at the diversity of places in a home and creating different modes within the office. But I don't really think at the end of the day that it needs to mimic that, and that by mimicking that, it's going to decrease work-life balance. I think the work-life balance is a whole different kind of question.
And can you speak a little bit more to the blanket branding in a shared office space? I think that was a really interesting concept for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you think about having spaces that are digitally enabled, and that doesn't mean it's always a screen. That can also be sound, that can also be lighting. Being able to, you really can flip the switch on that. So if you have templates and you have that are designed to support the form factors of the various screens and experiences in the office, you can really design those experiences to reflect your culture and just roll them out across all those screens, across the soundscape, across everything. So whether you do that to switch modes within one office, you're not switching, or you're switching to kind of celebrate another brand and kind of, okay, let's switch it out to today's Gensler day, like let's move into those color schemes and those employees that we celebrate and that content, which is really about our culture. I think that's something that, again, if you have the platforms in the space to do that, it shouldn't be too difficult.
Yeah, it's a really, really interesting idea. Well, we are coming to time. Do you have any parting words you'd like to share?
No, thank you all so much for being engaged. I'm so glad. It really helps to hear what you all are thinking. I know the next thing I'm going to do is get and read all the chats, since I couldn't talk and read at the same time. But thank you all so, so much for being a part of today. And I hope there's been some light bulbs or something out of this that you can bring into the work that you do.
Yes, and thank you so much again, Bonnie. What a great presentation, and obviously so relevant, especially as everything is rapidly opening up across the country, and we're all going to be going back to the workplace and entering into these new environments with all these new technologies. So just to recap, we will have a recording of this available on the Neocon library, video library, which is on neocon.com. So if you'd like to go back or send it to a friend, please feel free to do that. And then Bonnie, we will share all of the comments and questions with you so you can go back and answer some or have some further conversations. So thank you so much. We really appreciate having you.
Have a great day, everyone.
Good day.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.